spiders! Hey there, everybody. It's Mike from thegraciousguest.org, and we are here today to discuss fear. Very important topic, very relevant topic. I mean, we all run into it every single day. What are we supposed to do about it, right? What do you mean, be not afraid? What do you mean, fear not, Jesus? That's impossible, But before we do any of that, make sure you subscribe right now. Go ahead and like this video, share this video. If you're listening to the podcast version of it, do whatever you can in your favorite podcast aggregator to like, to follow, to share this episode with someone that you think might be impacted by it in a positive way, and really helps kind of get the channel noticed. It gets it out there for people. Helps it to turn up in people's searches, which in this case, that might be something that could really help somebody out in a practical way if they are, like so many of us are very frequently, dealing with fear. So again, thegraciousguest.org is the website, The Gracious Guest on YouTube, The Gracious Guest podcast. You'll be able to find this program anywhere. We look at all kinds of stuff on here from the perspective of our faith, when it comes to where to find those sort of places in life that God's trying to break in and sometimes subtle ways, very often subtle ways. So in literature, in movies, those moments where you just have a kind of aha moment, an experience of wonder and awe. And that's what we do around here, as my coffee cup you can see here says. I gotta get this as a merch thing. I haven't done that yet. The Gracious Guest, right? Don't forget to wonder, living with wonder and awe. That's kind of what we're all about here. So, without further ado, fear? Why would you be talking about that? Well, I don't know about you guys, but nothing is a more likely source of crushing my sense of wonder and awe than an in-my-face experience of fear, okay? Whatever that might be, some kind of phobia that you have, in maybe a more extreme case. But, how do we balance the reality that fear is in one sense an experience that we're all very familiar with, very commonplace, but it can also be something that's much more than just a quick little reaction to a bug or to a snake or to whatever it is, that moment of that adrenaline spike. What if fear becomes a lived experience? What if fear becomes my home, and everywhere I go and everywhere I do and everything I think about is somehow overshadowed by it? So these are the kinds of things I was able to talk with my friend Father Josh Weaver, who is the parochial vicar. For those of you who aren't Catholic, that's basically a usually a younger priest at a parish who's not the pastor, but he's got a couple different assignments potentially in the parish to kind of help the pastor out. So he's the parochial vicar at St. Joan of Arc Parish in Hershey, PA. That's correct. That's the Hershey, Pennsylvania. Hershey chocolate. So he is the parochial vicar there at St. Joan of Arc Parish. St. Joan of Arc herself, who was no stranger to experiences of fear and the need to act in courage and fortitude. He is also the chaplain at Bishop McDevitt High School in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And so I wanted to have this experience to chat with Father Weaver about fear, how it's impacted him, how he counsels people in his priesthood and advises them from really this place of faith in our Lord, guiding us through these experiences of fear. What does he have to say about fear? Let's go ahead and take a look now. Father Weaver, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I don't know why. To be honest, it's just to clarify for the audience. I didn't think like I'm meditating on fear or fears on my mind, and for whatever reason you pop into my head. It wasn't exactly like that. It was more like we were talking about maybe having you on, and then this topic was something else I was thinking about, and I thought, that's something we could really explore. But I
I've been
did want
told
to
I'm a
just
very
maybe
intimidating individual, so.
Is it right? Yeah. Thinking of you filled
No,
me with
not at all.
fear, and then no. So just just to kick things off in a kind of an obvious way, but maybe an important way. And obviously we're going to ultimately look at this from the perspective of faith, but just a quick little Google search, fear definition yields this little gem, right? An unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. Fair enough. So what do you think of that as far as a definition of fear in general?
Um, it's definitely not a bad one. I definitely like the idea that fear is some kind of, I guess, an aversion or an avoidance of something evil. And I think it's interesting, though, that they commented that it's an emotion. And I would say that's definitely a
Yeah.
component of fear, because we use the word fear, but we can use it in a lot of different ways, because you also hear fear of the Lord, which we consider something that's a good thing, a reverence.
Right.
There's fear as an emotion, certainly, that like if I'm out hiking and I encounter a big bear and I'm afraid for my life, like an emotion as a
Right.
reaction to some type of stimulus that I have no control over. You're like, okay, that seems pretty fair. But then also we hear like a lot in scripture or just a lot of religious speakers about this idea of like, don't be afraid, as if it's like a choice. So in
Right.
some ways it sounds like fear is not a choice, where it's just an emotional reaction. And in some ways it's a choice where it could be considered a sin, right? That you're choosing fear in some way.
Right.
And then also there's this virtue of fear of the Lord that figures in at some point. So I think that definition encompasses an aspect of fear, but I don't think it's complete either. Because I think when we just say fear, a lot of times people they think one of those three, but they might actually be talking past each other. So I think it's helpful to clarify like which of those three you're talking about when you're talking about fear.
That's a great point, because I also had open some of these. I was telling you before we started the show here, just some of these quotes, that you hear, and these are all like Instagram and Pinterest type things, right? Like cross-stitched on pillows, right? Like, fear not, you're of more value than many sparrows. The angel said, fear not, for behold, I bring you good news. Fear not, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Fear not, so over and over and over again, I think most Christians probably, when we think about this from a perspective of faith, we really do, I know in my case, come up against that that one you were talking about, or that category, if you want to talk about it, of this kind of this command, right? Like, it's because sometimes it's not just like an encouraging, like, don't be afraid, it's going to be okay. It's like a command to fear not and to be not afraid. And then, I think the emotion definition is limited, like you were saying, because let's be honest, there's a lot of people, and this, I'm going to kick it back to you here to see what you think about this. There's a lot of people, and I've been one of them myself on many occasions, and continue to be in some ways, who hear a command like that from Jesus, or a command from someone speaking on behalf of God, like a prophet or an angel. And how does that jive with the fact that I'm being commanded by God not to fear, but these circumstances around me, or the situation I'm finding myself in life, is just completely drowning me in dread, like every single day, and in some extreme cases, maybe it's a war-torn nation or something, or endemic poverty, or even like abuse or something like that. So how do we kind of navigate through that in this whole question of like that, what's he talking about there? Because clearly that can't be, don't feel the emotion, right, of the
Right.
fear that obviously these outside circumstances are just probably going to make happen without my control, or limited control.
Right, exactly. Because, like you said, I think that's an important point that a lot of people, that I talk to don't necessarily grasp, is that emotions are not like, we're not responsible for them morally. They're a reaction to something that's a stimulus. So, like, the fact that you feel an initial fear when your life is threatened, that's not a sin. You didn't have control over that. It's always like what we do with those things that determines whether or not something is, morally good and virtuous, or whether it be considered a sin. So I think, you hit the nail on the head, that just because we feel something initially, even if it be unpleasant, doesn't mean like that's confessional matter, right away. But
Right.
yeah, how to navigate that is definitely tough. That's where we rely on growing in virtue, especially the gift of fortitude. Is not just,
Right.
and that's the thing with fear. It's not just then being like the opposite of extreme and being so forward and courageous that you can put yourself in harm's way and feel nothing. Like, that's being too rash. I think it's
Right.
has to
Yeah.
be somewhere in the middle, where you it has to be like what's the word I'm looking for? Like ordinate. It has to be like on the right
Yeah.
level that like, okay, yes, that I'm willing to endure some type of evil, because if we said that fear is like wanting to avoid some kind of evil, whether it be a moral evil, such as sin, or even like a physical evil like bodily harm, that we think of, okay, well, is the good that I'm pursuing better than the evil that I would endure? Is it like worth it? And that's where that virtue of
Mhm.
fortitude, I think, really comes in, where it's like, today, and that we're recording this, Saint Teresa Benedict of the Cross, she's a martyr. She
Right.
endured bodily harm for the sake of the spiritual good of witnessing to Christ and witnessing to the faith, and we honor that and we celebrate, that great thing, even though something like evil was done to her, that the greater good was witnessing to Christ and the faith. And so that having that gift of fortitude really helps us to endure whatever evil comes at us, whether it be physical or whatever, for the greater good. So
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
and how?
there's all sorts of ways to grow in that, but
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, and actually, that's what I wanted to ask you next, because you had mentioned, in some of our notes beforehand about, your own experiences of this, of maybe, you know, not handling it so well, and then handling it, better, or more, and maybe more in line with a position or an attitude of faith in God's
mm-hmm.
providence. So, because I want to ask you about that, but if I can just add one little thing to what you were saying, I think that it kind of connects to that definition from the beginning too, as far as with the emotion side of it, but maybe with the bigger stuff too, where it's not just a threat. Like there is a place God put this in us, for very primal reasons in one sense, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
where we will be motivated instantaneously, right? Because if it relied on me rationally working it through, that might be too late
Mm-hmm.
to avoid the falling building or the bear or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So there is something good about the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we have that adrenaline response, or we have that built into us clearly by God. Sometimes that can get distorted, or just through the fallen world, we can have biochemical challenges, and I have family and friends, and myself too, I think sometimes, but more so some people I know who have proclivities for anxiety, or for depression, or for sort of more fear-based responses and stuff like that. But the what am I saying here? I lost track of my thought. Oh, yeah. So um, to recognize the goodness, in a sense, of God giving us that to protect us, but to also recognize that it's not a rational, it's not really
Right.
designed to be a rational thing. We have to steer it, because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you get the exact same reaction from a perceived threat that's completely make believe, right?
Exactly.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, and the one example I'll give, and then I'll kick it over to you, because it's just a simple one that's kind of silly, but I've told people before, the way I was physiologically feeling before the first dance I went to in high school was absolutely identical to the way I felt laying on the floor of my hut while we were being mortared in Iraq. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
which one does it make more sense to feel fear over? Well,
Mm-hmm.
there's reasons I felt fear for both of those, but I actually had that insight into myself through that kind of silly maybe example, or one's life threatening, but that reality that, wait a minute, like the chemicals and the processes that God built into my nature are identical, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and there has to be more to this. There has to be like the me, like my true self has to be choosing in those moments how to handle it, how to direct it. So you just to kick it over to you for the
Yeah.
examples you brought up, because I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a good time to get into those.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because you that's why God gave us, an intellect to help. Yes, we have like those sensitive appetites where like we have those feelings and those inclinations, those desires, but we're not meant to just pursue them without like checking it, And I think
Right.
that's a great point. That's why we have to test things. Like, is this rational, or am I being irrational in my fear or whatever desire it is? But yeah, the examples I brought up, I think they show like kind of how I grew by God's grace. The most afraid I think I've ever been was actually going into the seminary. That when I was in college, I was in my sophomore year. at Mount St. Mary's, and I was dating this awesome girl, and that's when I started to feel the tug and the call. And I didn't like that call because I was like super happy in this relationship. Like the priest there was even like, he said like, I kind of want you guys to run couples ministry. At the time we were freshmen in college.
No pressure.
And he's like, I want you to run it's like, he's like, because you guys are like the kind of couple that we want. And I'm like, I'm honored.
Oh my.
But I was like super happy because she was like my best friend, and we just got along really, really well. And she was someone I could have foreseen marrying, even though I would have been like 18, 19 at the time. And then God started tugging, and long story short, he was very persistent as he is. And when eventually like we broke up so that I could discern the seminary more seriously, which for me pretty much meant entering, because I was not leaving her unless I was entering. And I felt so spiritually attacked, like to the point where I almost felt like paralyzed at times, where there are all these ideas which were clearly from the evil one of like, God's not really looking out for you. Like, he gave you this girl so you could be like so happy, just so he could say like, okay, now endure the cross like I have. I want you to suffer like me. Or, he says he's going to like take her away and provide something for you later. And it's going to be totally worth it. But like, that's bogus. Like, that's not going to happen. And then it's like, just look at it right now. You broke up with her. You entered the seminary. Everything should be good. You're following Jesus. And then you're so miserable that like, I was probably crying myself to sleep like 2-3 times a week, for months. Like it really like brought me down, and to the point where even in seminary, it was still bringing me down. That, my mom would hate me for saying this, but she even called my spiritual director. She's like, she went behind my back and she's like, something's not right with Joshua, and like, so
moms.
my friends, my mom, my friends, they were all like really concerned and reaching out to people, being like, he's really low. He's not the joyful, happy-go-lucky person that he was, and like we're really concerned for him. And they weren't wrong. I definitely was was feeling it, and it was just this fear of God not providing, of even God even though I knew in my head, it's like, I feel like he's like, I know this can't be right, but it's like he's lying to me almost. He's just trying to get
like you don't have any consolation or any like where's your proof or your tangible kind of
exactly. And like my guess is that honestly it was probably there, but I think this is where the fear as a choice comes in. I think I kind of liked sulking. I think I kind of maybe even liked some of the attention, and I'm not sure. I think I probably turned my back to a lot of the consolations God was trying to offer me, or a lot of the things that he was trying to comfort me with, that I don't know, I just guess I got used to being in this state of fear and dread and just being downcast, and I was like, you know what? Like I'm sure I missed out on a lot of consolations because of like the choice I was making to just kind of endure that. And then on the flip side,
that's a good point.
Oh, go ahead. I'll let you. If you
that's I was just thinking, because that's like I hadn't thought of that ahead of time, as far as and that's not something that's going to be easy for us to admit, right? Ever. But I think if we, and again, we're not of course making light at all of terrible suffering people go through in real deep, immovable senses of fear. But even within that, sometimes there is a bizarre thing that happens where we can actually, in the mix of all of that, at least some aspect of us can attach to the fear as like a familiar kind of. It's weird. Like you look at the Israelites, out there in the desert, and they're there's scary things in the desert, and they don't have houses, and like there's things about the new situation of freedom that's scary to them, and it's leading many, not just one or two, but we see that over and over again, many of them, to utter these lines that usually I think when we read it, we're like, what is wrong with them? But if we're honest, we could see ourselves in that boat too, where it's like, let's go back to slavery. Like, what are they talking about? It's like, it's because it's the thing they know, and it doesn't matter that it's horrible.
The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So. Even if the thing that you don't know is so much better. So
and that, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was like my experience there, where I definitely didn't handle fear well. Thankfully, God really broke through, and it wasn't quite with this next story, but a couple years later, this would have been,
Yeah.
I guess, my third year in seminary. I think he had broken through probably about a year and a half into my time in seminary, but this is about year three, so a little
Did
bit
you
after
did you go
that.
in? Did you do pre-thea at all, or did you have to do college? Did you
So
transfer
I
over to
so
college seminary?
Right. So after my sophomore year of college, I actually transferred into college seminary. So
Okay,
I
gotcha.
did not go pre-thea, and I did not go right out of high school.
Okay,
I went midway through my college career.
gotcha.
So I ended up going
Okay,
through college seminary, but just 2 years of it.
okay,
But in my third year, so that would have been first theology at this point,
right.
um, I had another encounter with, or rather, well, what should have brought on a lot of fear, which I was diagnosed with cancer during my, I guess, around Easter time of that year. So towards the
Wow.
back half um, of my time there. And that was such like a crazy experience. I still say today it's one of the most powerful and blessed experiences of my life. And really, what
Hmm.
happened was, I think it was an answer to a prayer. First of all, I was struggling with my vocation, and like, God, what are you calling me to? Like, you haven't fulfilled that hole in my heart that she left. And I just prayed. I said, God, I'm sick of those
Hmm.
little consolations. I'm sick of all these little things. I need something so big that I can't possibly
That's a
miss
dangerous
out on.
prayer.
Yeah,
That's a
my
dangerous
spiritual
prayer.
director told me to pray it.
Hmm.
He said, I said, Father,
Oh.
I am so sick of these little things. He's like, well, pray for something big. It's like, well, this isn't what I meant.
Oh
Um,
boy.
and then
Yeah.
it turns out we're going
Wow.
home for Easter break, and I go to the doctors, and I'll skip over all those details. So basically, it turns out they found a tumor, and
And had
they're
you,
like,
not to get too detailed, but like had you been feeling, any effects for a while, or was it just was discovered kind of
no,
unexpectedly, well,
no, I
with
know,
no background?
I yeah, no background. I woke up one morning,
Okay.
and noticed something was different. It wasn't painful or feeling bad. I was just like,
Yeah.
that's weird. I should probably get that looked at. So I just called my
Yeah.
physician, and they got me in that
Right.
day, and they're like, let's go. um,
Mm.
and before you know it, they're like, there's a tumor. It's probably cancer.
Wow.
Had surgery actually on Holy Thursday to have it removed.
Wow.
So my Holy Week was, I very much attached to the suffering Christ during that time. But
I'll bet. Yeah.
the crazy thing I remember was like sitting in my recliner after the surgery, waiting for like the biopsy results, which took a couple days. And it seemed like every time this always would happen, like it would be over a weekend. So of course they're not working then, so just like draw out the suspense. And so I'm like,
Yeah. Sure.
I'm sitting there like in my recliner thinking like, I'm 22 years old, and like we could totally find out that this is all across my body, and like this is it. Like there's nothing they could do. And I'm
Yeah.
like, man. And I just remember thinking like, I could only have a year left, or 6 months, or a month, or a week for all I know. And I felt this incredible peace. And I was just like,
Hmm.
Lord, I accept this. Like, I'm not afraid. And I think like, and like you think emotionally like I should have been, like in all the examples
Right.
we gave, it's like this would be an appropriate one to be afraid. But that's the thing about God's grace, that sometimes it's so powerful, even overwrites that emotion. But I remember feeling so assured of God's providence that my whole goal in life was to live my life totally for Him. Because at the end, the only thing that matters is how
Hmm.
much we loved God and how much we loved others. Everything else is extra. If we don't have those things, we wasted our life. And I was like, I
Right.
did that. Lord, I did not hold back in entering the seminary despite the fact I didn't want to. I tried to love the people in my life that you put there the best that I could. And I literally have no regrets,
Mm-hmm.
despite the fact that I could die at 22 with basically no money as a seminarian, like nothing to write home about. Of like, wow, look at everything he accomplished. Like, I really have no regrets. If you want to take me this week, like, I'm ready. Like, and I trust in your will that much, because like you conquered death. So if you can conquer death, what the heck do I have to fear? Kind of thing. And so in
Well,
those two stories, like
and that's
I think
amazing. Yeah.
one good and handling of it, and one bad.
Well,
Mhm.
and it's amazing because I'm just bringing up a scripture here that we all know. I'm save it for a second, but this is getting at I think really the core of what I think is really good for us to focus on with this question today, because like, and you had mentioned this in the text we are having back and forth, precisely about that end, right? That
Mhm.
telos, or that whatever you want to call it, that purpose for your whole life. And I think, you know, I mean, to like, what better evidence could you possibly have for the problems we're in? I think as as a
Mhm.
society, really as a world, because of sin, but our society maybe in a particular way because that's the one we know best, right? But what better evidence could you have for how far off we are in terms of that notion than seeing how we react, to moments of fear like this, where, when you really break it down, like I'll just give one example. Like I had this coworker at a previous job, um, who may or may not be listening to this, is probably not listening to this or watching this, but no hard feelings if they are. But just an example of, and a lot of people, have been in this boat, where this person is just, pretty much maybe even every day, or at least 9 times out of 10, just at you, right? Or a source of anxiety because like this, they're just, they don't like you. And they
Mhm.
like to let you know that, or they like to nitpick you or whatever it is. And so a fear from that kind of thing, where it's not, on the surface of it, it's not a fear of the unknown, right? Like a lot of fears we've been talking about is that fear of the unknown, maybe obvious, like an experience or a suffering coming up or looking at me in the face, and I'm fearful because it's a threat or a perceived threat, um, and that's kind of obvious. But even with something like that, where it's a known entity, or even in an extreme case like someone who's being abused, and like you can't get away from that person, and you have all of this experience informing this ongoing perpetual sense of it. But whatever the case is, you know, what am I really afraid of? I'm afraid of pain, right? Or I'm afraid of
Mhm.
at least discomfort, or the uncomfortable feeling of someone being nitpicky with me at work, or critical, or whatever it is. And it's really hard, I think, for me sometimes to dig down to like what's underneath all of this. It's like, I think I want peace, I want righteousness, I want justice, I want love, I want mercy. Like, if you really try to dig down, which I don't think we do a lot of times because we're just dwelling in the fear, what are these little clues we're getting from, all of this data, that underneath all of it, it's like we have this sense right in us that there is some kind of permanence. There's some kind of joy, endless joy, not just joy for a few minutes. I'm not satisfied with that. I
Mhm.
want it permanently. I want forever
Mhm.
peace. I want forever righteousness. I want forever harmony. Isn't that, what do you think? I'm just, long question, but could
Mhm.
that be evidence, even amidst that fear, that this really isn't the world we're meant to be in forever?
I
Just a
I think
thought.
so.
Like, could that,
I think so because like God made us this way, right? He made us
right?
with those desires, and clearly like we live in a fallen world. This is not the world that it was meant to be. This is not how God created it. It's fallen and He's going to redeem it. But I think you're absolutely right that like yeah, when we said like an aversion, fear is an aversion to evil. It's not just unknown or threatening. It's like, oh man, I don't want to sit with that person at the lunch table because it's going to be awkward conversation. I just don't like that awkward silence. You know that
And you see it
it's
ahead of
all
time,
known.
like it's already
Yeah,
happened,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So like, I mean, even that's like it's fear. It's I mean, obviously to a lesser degree than a lot of other things, but yeah, because and it's like, well, why do I not want that awkward conversation? It's like, well, I don't want to be in that kind of situation where it's uncomfortable. And like you said, it's like almost as if that this isn't the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be different.
Right.
It's supposed to be that peaceful, that joyful, that fulfilling. And when we experience something, it's like, oh, I'm not meant for this. This is not what I'm meant for. I'm meant for something different. I don't want to put myself in those positions that, it's like clearly against what I've been created for. So I think that's a great point that people don't think about enough. It's not just okay, I'm afraid. Okay, why am I afraid? And then they just like associate it with a certain person or experience. But no, like dig deeper. I think it can be
Mm.
evidence of like God made you this way, because He didn't make us to be afraid, to choose that, or to enjoy that.
Yeah.
We're meant for that peace and that comfort that only He ultimately can bring. So I think you hit the nail on the head on that one.
And I think that's something we learned. It reminds me another thing that we learned in our it's called resilience training in the Army. It was a positive psychology based kind of program to try to teach actual soldiers, like at the unit level, like the officers, the senior NCOs and stuff, to try to basically try to help. It's a subsidiarity thing, funny enough, and they didn't use that word, but that's what they were doing. And to try to have Army units be able to, as best possible in house, help people cope with stuff, help people cope with negative thought patterns, all that kind of stuff, and not do clinical things, obviously, but to try to maybe get at some of those things that can lead to bigger issues, and even connected to PTSD stuff. But long story short, catastrophic thinking was something that came up a lot, and that's something I tend to struggle with. And we did a really neat exercise that showed this exercise where you just were spiraling down and down in these worries, and they showed how irrational it could be, because it's like, oh, this is going to happen. I'm going to lose my job, and I'm not going to have any money, and I'm not going to be able to provide for my kids. And like, they would have you do an exercise where you would go as far out with it as you could. And what was amazing was you discovered pretty quickly how even death didn't stop the pattern, because then it was like, and then I'm going to die. And then like, and then, my kids aren't going to have me. And it would just, there was no end to it. And so we would try to learn methods of how to be like, okay, so this is just a little tip I'd throw out there from my 2 cents, and then I'll see what you think, because we can just last couple minutes, we can maybe get at, for what it's worth, our advice or our insights or whatever on, ways that we can all maybe kind of today, try something to practice fortitude or courage, but we would do this unit where, or this training where we would have someone, like, you'd coach somebody through, okay, here's a situation coming up, or this is a situation you're dealing with. Go ahead, have fun, just have a blast with it. Go down the absolute worst case scenario you can think of, for like 3 or 4 minutes. Like, just keep, and you keep pushing them, like, go, 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 go. Take it as ridiculously awful as you possibly can. And the goal was, like, if you really did that intentionally, you started to kind of see how ridiculous that was, and then I don't remember if the order mattered, but then you'd also have them go to the other extreme and go to an equally absurd positive level, where like, actually, it'll turn out to be a good thing. And, and that was ridiculous. And then you could kind of bring it into the middle and be like, okay, here's most likely, like, okay, I screwed this thing up at work. I'm going to get yelled at, but maybe it probably won't get fired because of this. And who knows? But I thought that was a really good practical, again, it's psychology, but there's a spirituality, I think, underlying that. So that's one little encouragement I'd give. I don't do it enough, but I know for the few times I have done that in those moments, that can really kind of help me get back to a functioning, place. So I would just share that. But what are your thoughts on fortitude, courage, maybe something we can do today to practice it?
Yeah. So I think so much of it is like, when we realize that, like, God is in control, there really isn't, it's really hard to be afraid when you're like, wait, this all-powerful being who knows everything, whose will can't be stopped. You're like, okay. And then you realize, oh wait, he's on my side. Like, he wants what's best for me. So, like, literally nothing can stop him. Right. And he loves me and he wants what's best for me. And by the way, like, he conquered death, like, right? That's why it's good for, like, us to meditate on the crucifixion and resurrection, that he conquered it. Like, and that's the thing that ultimately a lot of us are afraid of most. And you're like, okay, so what is there really to be afraid of at this point? So, like, I think, so first of all, knowing that is helpful and kind of rationalizing that. But one of my spiritual directors once said that the biggest enemy in the spiritual life is a bad memory. That we forget about all the amazing things that God has done for us. That, like, really, how do you develop trust in that all-powerful being? Well, the only way to develop trust with someone is to trust them and watch them come through for you. Time and time again. Like, trustful. Yeah. Like, okay, you're going to fall into my arms. Is Father Josh A. strong enough to catch me? Is he willing to catch me? Is he coordinated enough to catch me? And, like, the first time is super scary and I catch you. Second time, maybe a little less scary. By the 100th time, you're like, I'm pretty confident this guy's going to catch me. I think the same thing is true with God.
Right.
That the reality is we've trusted him before, and he's come through for us time and time and time and time again. But the evil one
Yeah.
gets us to totally just flush that out of our memory and forget that God ever did that. Because
Yeah.
so how often in our prayer we're like, God, are you even there? Are you listening? Are you gonna come through for me? Like, you're gonna let me down? You're like, he hasn't let you down in however many years. You think he's gonna start now? Um, so I think, so honestly, a simple exercise that I tell a lot of people that struggle with this, is like, go to your room, come up with 5 ways throughout your life that you've noticed God come through for you. Whether that, like, you really needed him
Hmm.
and you asked him for help and he came through, or he came through without you even asking because you didn't even realize it. Like, come up with 5 ways.
Right.
Recall them. And honestly, not even just like think about them as like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but like you can even relive them in your prayer and do some form of lectio with them. And I usually tell them to like attach
Right.
like a glory be to them, be like that prayer of praise and thanksgiving. Like one thing I might do would be relive
Yeah.
my cancer experience and how close I felt to him
Right.
there, and then just end with a simple glory be as a reminder of, no, you were with me there, and you've always been with me. So just sometimes it's as easy as just calling to mind ways that he's been present to you, and reliving
Hmm.
those, reconnecting with them, and thanking him for that, and then just asking him to say, like, please help me to see you now, because you've always been with me, and I know you're going to continue. I just don't see you right now. Help me to see you in this
Right.
moment. And you'd be surprised how like hard it is to be afraid when you know that the all-powerful God is at your side, who has come through for you a million times in the past, is with you now, and will be in the future. That's the simple one. And if you can't find
Yeah.
an example in your own life, Scripture's loaded with them. Abraham,
That's a,
Joseph,
yep. I was. Yep.
So like even
Yeah.
if you're really struggling, like you're really in that place where you're like, I don't know if God's ever been there for me. Well, God hasn't changed. So he's the same God with
Hmm.
Abraham, with Joseph, with the prophets, everyone.
Yeah.
He's just as with you there, or with you now, as he was with them then. So that would be a simple thing you can do.
Awesome.
Anyone can go into a room and recall their life story.
Amen. I maybe that's a good place to close there with that Joseph in the Old Testament, that wonderful line. It's one of my favorites when he says to his brothers, what you meant for
Mm-hmm.
evil, God meant for good. That's
Exactly.
because he went through a lot worse stuff than a lot of us ever have, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's all, yeah. It's I think it really is ultimately about trust. That we can't pin too much on wanting having all the proof necessarily the way we want it, because what do we know? You know,
Mm-hmm.
humility, right? So,
Exactly. And
well, Father,
it's so
thank you
much
so
more
much for. Oh
freeing.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Oh man, so well, thank you so much for coming on today. We're definitely going to have you back if you're interested. I'm
Oh,
always
thank
open
you.
for topic ideas too. So that from listeners to the show, from guests, I've got a list of folks I love to revisit. So this is going to be a fun future conversation series, I think, for sure. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, there's some good information for you, some good tips, hopefully, for you. Hopefully, a conversation that might be able to help you a little bit today, at least. I know it helped me in my own kind of processing of this whole question of fear. Gave me some good stuff to mull over and to really go take to prayer first and foremost. So again, please don't forget to visit the website, thegraciousguest.org. Share that with your friends and family. Everything's posted right at the top there. Links to the YouTube channel as well, The Gracious Guest. Please subscribe today. Let's get that subscription number up so we can get these videos and this content, these podcasts. Also, if you're listening to the podcast, get these out to people who might enjoy them, who might benefit from them somehow, as we all try to learn how to live with wonder and awe, yearning for our heavenly home, because that's going to really shape the way we live our day-to-day lives. Put everything in context, right? That we remember that Jesus said that we should store up our treasure in heaven, not on earth, but rather to throw our anchor, in a sense, into eternal life, trusting, as Father was saying, trusting that God is drawing us to himself precisely as he said he is. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. God bless you. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.